Before the Sonic Frontiers Defense Squad gets out their pitchforks cause, you know, the title and thumbnail, stop, chill for a second, and hear me out. This isn't going to be some doom and gloom video about how Sonic Frontiers is going to fail just because of cyberspace. Yes, I have a long list of gripes with it, and you probably do too. Probably. But despite all of that, it's going to do nothing to bring the ship down. I'm gonna make a bold claim right now, actually. From everything I've seen and read about the game, Sonic Frontiers is shaping up to be the turning point that Sonic has been in need of for years. Yes, I know, a bold claim, but all the pieces are in place for Sonic Frontiers to be exactly that, and I think it's gonna do great. I've got 2 copies of the game pre-ordered and set to go. I'm gonna go all in 2 months from now, and that's a fact. Having said that, there is no denying that cyberspace has turned out to be quite the disappointment, and it's for reasons that frankly I don't think the other side of the debate is considering all that much. This debate is one that has the community split down the middle right now. It's been so painful to watch the discourse over it, and so I'm slightly uncomfortable making this video on it, so I just want to get something clear. I'm not out trying to change anybody's viewpoints, but as this is my channel, I am kinda inclined to toss my own opinions in there once in a while. So that's what I'm gonna do. If you're excited with Sonic Frontiers, I'm right there with you. But if you happen to be among those who aren't excited for Frontiers just because of cyberspace, I find cyberspace to be just as much of a letdown, but it's not gonna make Frontiers less of a hype game. But regardless, I will do my best to explain why cyberspace could have been done so much better. In case you guys are wondering what sparked the whole cyberspace debate, I'll explain. When footage of the game started rolling in from Gamescom, one thing quickly became evident. We'd known in advance that it would be recycling stage themes like Green Hill and Chemical Plant and whatever. But from the footage, we started to notice that cyberspace was also directly ripping layouts from previous Sonic titles. Ever played Windmill Isle Act 1 and Sonic Unleashed? You're gonna be playing that exact same layout in the first cyberspace stage of Sonic Frontiers, and that is Green Hill Zone. Ever played Windmill Isle Act 2? That'll be in Sky Sanctuary. Ever played Sonic Generations Green Hill Act 2? That'll be in Sunset Hill. Ever played Chemical Plant Act 2 Sonic Generations? You'll also be replaying that in Frontiers, layout and all. It understandably caused outrage for quite a number of people, and I am among them, I'm not going to lie to you. But I did not go on to declare Frontiers a lost cause just because of how cyberspace turned out. You know, but I hate the storyline in Sonic Colors. That never stopped me from being a Colors fanboy. And at one point, I used to not like the Werehog stages in Sonic Unleashed, though I've come around to them recently. And that never stopped me from putting Unleashed among my top 3 Sonic games that I personally enjoy. So, whether cyberspace was good or bad, it's not going to diminish my chances of liking Sonic Frontiers. But despite that, I still find this to be somewhat problematic, not for Frontiers itself, but for the mindset that both SEGA and Sonic Team have towards the franchise. The justification for cyberspace ripping off stage layouts from previous Sonic titles is that they're meant to represent Sonic's memories in a jumbled up state. For example, enemies in Chemical Plant will actually find their way into Sky Sanctuary, and as I've already described, layouts in Sonic Unleashed will find their way into Green Hill Zone or Sky Sanctuary, and so on and so forth. This is meant to be like a corruption of Sonic's memories, and honestly, this is a fascinating concept that has produced some appealing results. Dragon Road Sky Sanctuary, bro, I swear I would not mind playing through this. And City Escape in one of the city stages? An Adventure 2 stage? They aren't just recycling boost games? Oh my god. But as hyped as I may sound right now, I'm sorry. If it was problematic for them to borrow layouts from boost games, it's just as problematic if they do so from non-boost Sonic titles. I gotta be consistent here. Anyway, Iizuka's line of reasoning for cyberspace is that it has to do with Sonic's memories, and that's fair enough. However, that defense falls apart quickly when you consider some other things, before anybody goes yelling about memories. let me point you towards two other games that also pull from Sonic's memories. One is Sonic Mania, the other is Sonic Generations. And yet, compared to Frontiers, they do reuse level assets, but to a far lesser extent. And what little they do use, they tie into a brand new experience, to the point that these stages stand on their own. You're not gonna look at Chemical Plant in Sonic Generations, whether we're talking the classic or modern layout, and say that it's gonna be the same experience you will get if you were to play the original Chemical Plant in Sonic 2. They are completely different animals. The same argument can be made for the Sonic Mania version of Chemical Plant. Play that, and just try to say it's the same Chemical Plant that you'll see in Sonic 2. That right there is the chief complaint of the Cyberspace stages. If they could renovate these stages like this back then, why couldn't they do the same thing here? That was certainly confusing. Now, the silver line to this is that there will be new layouts, as also confirmed by Iizuka himself, but from everything we've seen so far, it looks like we'll be seeing reused layouts far more often than we'll be seeing new layouts. And for anybody thinking that we'll get new stage themes also, don't get your hopes up. Let's try to remember that Cyberspace is based on Sonic's memories. If we start seeing stages that Sonic himself has never been to before, it would contradict the whole point of their approach to Cyberspace. An example of what might be an original Cyberspace layout can be seen in this footage right here. It's of the same city stage that we've known about since the Nintendo Direct, and this time we're getting an extended look at it. I haven't been able to make any comparisons between this stage and a Legacy stage, unless I'm missing something, so this might be one of those new things that Iizuka mentioned we'd see, and if so, I'm hoping we're getting more stages like this because it looks flippin' good. But it isn't just reused stage layouts that I take issue with. It also has to do with the consistency in their reasoning for the storyline. There be things called memory tokens. You collect these in order to save Sonic's friends, and each character has a set of memory tokens that's specific to them. Given how these are labeled, it was easy to assume that not only would you be saving Sonic's friends by collecting them, you'd also be helping to restore their memories. I believe I raised this talking point in a previous video. But then the story trailer came along and dashed that theory to pieces, because Sonic recognized Amy after he found her. In the in-game version of that cutscene, Amy also recognizes Sonic. It's like they've never forgotten about each other. That's because they haven't. Another piece of evidence here. It has to do with the first cutscenes that play after Sonic's successful escape from cyberspace. While he takes a moment to collect himself, he calls out Tails and Amy by name. Don't you think if Sonic was suffering from amnesia, he wouldn't be able to remember their names, let alone recall their faces? For the cutscenes I've watched, nothing has suggested that any traces of amnesia have settled in, unless that happens much later on in the story and we just haven't gotten to that point yet. But I don't know how they'd be able to make the story work if amnesia ever happened, so I think we can safely rule that out. This being the case, what need was there to base Cyberspace on Sonic's history? The more I think about it, the more it just busts my brain. Like, why exactly did they have to do this? If the cast was suffering from amnesia, then I would understand. But they're not, so why do we need to see Legacy stages in a new mainline title for like the millionth time? And that's a key phrase right there, for like the millionth time. I think people tend to forget that the last decade of Sonic releases was largely characteristic of two things: nostalgia and Sonic Boom. Many of the games released within that time frame were nostalgia reliant in one form or another. First of all, there was Sonic Forces, which used various layouts for Green Hill, Chemical Plant, and Death Egg as a part of its lineup. Then was Sonic Mania and Sonic Generations, which I already name dropped here, and was also the 3DS version of Generations, which is partially guilty of the same thing Sonic Frontiers is doing. It straight up copied the layouts for Green Hill Act 1, Casino Night Act 1, and Mushroom Hill Act 1, but it did innovate on everything else. Then there's both episodes of the Sonic 4 series. While it didn't necessarily reuse layouts, you could definitely tell the Sonic team was largely falling back to an approach of what worked before rather than trying to innovate. And another example is Sonic Colors, mainly for its Game Land stages. A part of the stage list was based directly on reusing layouts from Sonic 1's stage list. You find trace of Green Hill Act 1, Marble Act 1, Spring Yard Act 1, and so on inside Game Land itself if you looked hard enough. But this wasn't the case for literally every stage. Only part of it featured callbacks. Not that I ever really think of the game landscape when playing Colors, I never really cared for them. And I guess if you wanted, you could count Colors Ultimate as a part of the nostalgia era too, because it was a remaster of a game that was 11 years old at the time. It's 12 years old now. I don't really mind it though. By now I think my point should be clear. Much of the last decade has seen Sonic Team going back into familiar territory. The nostalgia card is nice to play once in a while, but when it's overplayed, it starts to lose its shock value. And I think that accurately describes why I have a problem with Cyberspace. To use another example, have you ever gone a whole week straight where all you had to eat was sandwiches? And like not different sandwiches day by day, but the exact same sandwich and all, multiple times a day for a whole week straight. You'd get pretty fed up with sandwiches by the end of the week now, wouldn't you? And what's funny is, I actually had to do something like this at one point when I was living out of state. It wasn't fun, and I don't ever want to have to do that again. Putting it simply, I am tired of seeing old stuff in new Sonic games. I don't mind going back and revisiting the older games, I enjoy doing so even. But when I see a new Sonic game, I expect new stuff. And to be fair, that's exactly what we're getting with Sonic Frontiers. This much was made evident by the open zone gameplay. I'm not saying we're not getting anything new, but if anything, that just serves to back up my argument. If Sonic Team could absolutely outdo themselves with being as creative as they've been with the open zone aspect, why couldn't they devote that same level of creativity towards Cyberspace? And I'm not saying they didn't work hard in creating Cyberspace, there was definitely effort that went into it. It's just they made a decision for it that I heavily disagree with. It's not a question of whether or not they worked hard, but my point stands. And I'm sorry, but recycling stage layouts without renovating them just as was done with Mania and Generations doesn't count as creative in my book. You're free to agree or disagree with me on this, but that is where I stand. Now, there are those of you that won't give a crap about what was done with Cyberspace, and that's perfectly valid. I've enjoyed these recycled layouts from the games they came from, and obviously I'll enjoy them again when I play through Cyberspace. But on the other hand, to anybody who's ticked off about what was done with Cyberspace, I can completely relate. I think it was a lost opportunity for Sonic Team to further flex with their creativity, just as they did with the open zone gameplay. After like over a decade of seeing familiar stuff, we deserved a game that was completely free of a trend set within the last decade. But at the same time, I can't 100% blame SEGA and or Sonic Team for this, because they did try new things within the last decade, but they usually crashed and burned. First there was Sonic Lost World, which released to mixed reviews. I believe it's generally regarded as mediocre. And of course, I don't even need to talk about what happened with Sonic Boom, now do I? But this may have sent the wrong message, that Sonic cannot succeed without some form of callback, which obviously isn't true. If that were the case, the Sonic Forces series never would have been discontinued, it would have been finished instead. And Sonic Forces would have been regarded as a good game, when generally it isn't. It takes more than nostalgia for a Sonic game, or for any game to be successful. Essentially, my issue with Cyberspace comes down to three things: over-reliance on nostalgia, SEGA and Sonic Team's mindset with how Sonic is successful as a brand, or what I think is part of their mindset anyway. I'm open to being wrong. And finally, a possible, and I stress the word possible, inconsistency with the storyline. I say it because, as I pointed out a few minutes ago, if Sonic and the rest of the cast aren't suffering from amnesia, I don't know what need is there for Sonic to explore a world reconstructed by his memories, unless it has to do with a story-related reason that has yet to be revealed, because in the articles I've read, I've noticed no such thing. But I will keep an open mind and admit that maybe I'm missing the bigger picture here, and once I finally get the game, all will be made clear. But we must also realize, this story was written by Sonic Team, and by Ian Flynn also. He had a major helping hand the story after all. So, I don't know what pushed them to include nostalgia-related elements, honestly. But they're at that point in the game where they can't go back and redo them now. It's a little too late for that. So, it is what it is. We're getting what we're getting. And the good thing to come out of all of this is, we're going to be getting a great game. Before I end the video off, I want to touch upon one more subject. The idea of cyberspace being optional. I think this is true only to an extent. From the Gamescom footage, you will be starting the game off with the first cyberspace stage, whether you want to or not. Then the game guides you to another cyberspace stage as a part of its tutorial. This is necessary as if you want to know how to play the game effectively, you're going to have to understand how to tackle both cyberspace and the open zone aspect, in case you decide to switch between one and the other. Later on though, these stages may become less necessary, but keep in mind, they are still a method of obtaining the vault keys, which you will need to unlock the Chaos Emeralds, as they will progress the storyline. So cyberspace being optional is only true to an extent, I feel. Not to mention, it gets referenced fairly often in cutscenes and trailers, including the overview trailer that SEGA recently put out. For the record, I think it was their best trailer yet. Point is, for cyberspace being supposedly optional, it gets referenced quite often. But similar to when I talked about the game's story, I'll need to get Frontiers itself in order to fully understand. So once again, I'll keep an open mind. And if it is optional, that's a good thing. Giving the player multiple pathways to the finish line can be another strong point for any video game. You've already seen an example of this with the fact that you can choose between different play styles, one being the action style and another being the speed style. This means that Sonic Frontiers has a chance to appeal to fans of not just Sonic, but of different franchises. I've certainly seen signs of this in the combat gameplay and the open zone itself, and that's definitely promising for Sonic Frontiers. And that does it for this video. Hopefully it helps to shed light on my reasoning for being disappointed with Cyberspace, and it's possible that some of you watching this video might have had similar reasons yourself, and I've been able to help put them into words. But if you had different reasons, I'd like to know about them, so talk to me in the comments below. And for those of you on the other side of this debate, I want to reiterate that I did not make this video to hate on Sonic Frontiers, to kill the hype for it, or anything stupid like that. I'm in full support of this game, and I'll be ready to get multiple copies of it when it comes out. My excitement hasn't lessened in the slightest. I just voiced my disagreement with the decision made by Sonic Team and wanted to explain why. That's really all there is to it. Whatever your thoughts on this debate may be, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Just keep it civil, please. And with that, I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, let me know with your likes and comments below, and don't forget to sub and ring that bell for more Sonic content. Peace! Take care, and don't forget, blue blurs for life.